So if you're just joining, I suppose, why are we here this morning? Well, hopefully you all know Natural Capital Ireland. We're a non-profit that advocates for the natural capital agenda. And one of the flagship projects we're involved in is the In-Case project, which is applying natural capital accounting principles to 4 different sites across Ireland and really trialling this UN standard, which I'll speak more about just now, in Ireland. Through that exercise, natural capital accounting is a data-hungry exercise. We were coming across the challenges and opportunities relating to nature-related data in Ireland, and we felt that there was a need for a big discussion, an open discussion on nature-related data in Ireland, its status, what's the future of it, how it's currently being used in research, and what recommendations can we make. So I suppose one of the core aims of this conference or this workshop today is that we make recommendations. So Natural Capital Ireland will be preparing a report to the Minister of State with recommendations on how the whole nature-related data landscape can be improved. So I just wanted to give some policies and some context for this whole discussion. So firstly, we have the Open Data Strategy, Ireland's Open Data Strategy. There's also a Northern Irish one, which kind of links closely to it. And is worth thinking about, given Ireland is a single biogeographical unit and we need to work closely with our Northern Irish partners. But what does the open data strategy say? It says that we need more open data to provide evidence that it will inform policy and improve our services. It commits to a life cycle approach to open data, and we'll speak more about what that means. But really, obviously, life cycle being from the moment you're planning to even collect the data to how it's going to be managed all the way through to the end of its life, if you want to call it that. And also, the open data strategy commits to meaningful citizen participation in decision making. So that's speaking a little bit to citizen science and highly relevant in the nature space. We also have data.gov.ie. So this website is Ireland's open data portal. It's core to our discussion today. It has over 10,000 data sets, and I just wanted to list them, or list the results by theme there. So you can see that there are by far the greatest number of data sets on the environment theme, over 3,200. And the top contributing bodies there are Met Éireann, the Marine Institute, the EPA, the Ordnance Survey Ireland, and the National Biodiversity Data Centre. There's plenty more. There's ones from local authorities, but I just thought it was really interesting that the environment theme dominates. So I think that's part of the reason why it's so important to have this discussion today. How are we going to manage all this nature-related data? Well, the programme for government, first of all, I suppose the open data strategy is up for review. It runs 2017 to 2022. As we all know, 2022 is going to roll around very, very quickly. So now is a good time to have this discussion to inform the next open data strategy. And I know the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform is currently reviewing it and conducting research to measure the impact of open data policies so far and inform the future policies. The programme for government also commits to a national digital strategy. It says that it will support biodiversity data collection. It says also that it will create a strategic policy unit in each government department, and that policy unit will have skills for complex data analysis, program evaluation, policy development, which I think is a great development. So it's kind of how we feed into that on the nature side. Clearly, we have the climate bill to be followed by the climate action later this year. That will provide us with sectoral carbon budgets for different industry sectors, and likely will begin to generate a lot of climate-related and environmental and nature-related data from companies and from different sectors of our economy and society. That is critical. What do we do with those disclosures? And also, this is being backed up at the EU level, huge kind of corporate reporting directives that are coming down the line. Clearly, this is also the year of COP26, a huge year for the UN Climate Summit, which will take place in November. There was recently an excellent event on open data and climate change run by the Department of Public Expenditure and Deralinks, who I believe are joining us today. So thanks very much for joining. That was an excellent event we're constantly saying in Natural Capital Ireland, as well as with other environmental NGOs, we have to recognise that nature is at the heart of our response to climate change, to our climate mitigation, or to our climate adaptation. So I suppose it's about what are we as Ireland bringing to COP26 in terms of the data that we've gathered on nature, how we're deploying that to tackle the climate crisis. But then we also have the UN Biodiversity Conference this year. So it's a bumper year for kind of big UN conferences that are critical for our future. If you're actually in any doubt about the importance of this biodiversity conference, the theme is ecological civilization. So I can't get bigger than that, I think. And there are a range of cross-cutting issues that are actually going to be addressed at this UN Biodiversity Conference. I just cherry-picked a few that I thought were relevant to our topic today. Access to genetic resources and benefit sharing, climate change and biodiversity, so that link between the two, monitoring, indicators and assessment, I think that's core, clearly, and then technical and scientific cooperation. So that's a very big part of what we will be talking about today. And then finally, the UN SEA, so the System of Environmental Economic Accounting. And if you haven't heard of that, it's very important for our conversation today. It's a UN statistical standard that was just formally adopted by the UN this year, I think in February. And what it is, it's a way of putting environmental information into an accounting format, and that accounting format can then speak to our national accounts, and those national accounts are kind of our national expenditure, and they give us measures like GDP. But this is about bringing nature and ecosystems into our measures of progress and how we account for our economy and society. This framework maps out the extent it provides guidelines basically for how to map out the extent and condition of our natural assets, and explains the services and benefits that humans get from those assets. That this is the core of the In-Case project that I mentioned earlier on. The Central Statistics Office has also set up an ecosystem accounting unit. So this is really taking off in Ireland. And again, I think a good reason for why we're meeting today to take a stock take, I guess, on where we are with nature-related data in Ireland. So that's a whole load of context, a whole load of policies that we can think about or have in the back of our mind as we meet today. I will just run another poll for you. Now, hold on. I have to go to the next poll. So I'll stop sharing results. Hopefully you haven't had that up the whole time. 1 second. So if I go to poll 2, there you go. So the question is, do you use nature-related data in your day-to-day work? Yes, frequently. Yes, sometimes. No. Other, please type in chat. I'm also interested in hearing about just interested members of the public. Do you go on data.gov.ie? Do you use it in your, in your day-to-day? Are you interested? Do you kind of just an interested member of the public?
Orla, just while the poll is running, I just want to move over to recording from your computer, if that's okay.
Yep, that's fine.
So, Emer, if you could stop recording and Orla just start, that would be great.
Some people will be intimately familiar with all the topics that we're discussing today. Some will be kind of a bit more high level, and then others are new to it, which is brilliant to have all those different perspectives, because we also need to encourage people to use nature-related data more often in their own lives and in their work as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to our wonderful presenters, beginning with Dr. Edward Curry from the Insight Centre, who will share a screen now. And just to say that our trusty timekeeper, Emer, will be keeping time and just give our speakers a 1-minute warning. And so do expect that. But yeah, Ed, over to you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks very much. Just confirming you can see my slides in full mode.
Yeah, we can. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation here today. I think it's a really fascinating and interesting topic, and I'm delighted to be able to kind of give some of my own thoughts on it and maybe share some of the insights that we have. So I'm Ed Curry. I'm from Insight Centre for Data Analytics, and today what I want to do is to kind of set the scene in terms of what's happening around AI and data ecosystems at the European level, and what does that maybe mean for us within Ireland, but also within the nature for data movement as well. So we start off with the important role that data plays in our society now. So we all agree that data is a resource that we need to be able to extract, and we know that data is key to be able to driving AI-driven innovations. One of the key challenges that we have as a society is that data is not equally accessible by everyone. So we have large organizations that have lots of data that they can extract insights from, but not everyone has access to this data. And this is potentially a barrier. The Economist here talks about this in economic terms, where startups and SMEs don't have access to data, but within the scientific community as well, you can have challenges around that. And also within natural capital as well, there's issues around accessing this data. And this is a problem that we need to solve as society, and it goes across everything. When we talk about data and AI, we know that they're going to power our smart environments. And a smart environment is where we use ICT as a way to be able to optimize the resource efficiency of different systems that we have. So whether it's buildings, water management, energy, cities, or our natural ecosystem as well, we can use data, we can use AI techniques to be able to optimize and to reduce the impacts that we have on our society. The way that we do this is by connecting lots of systems together. So by connecting intelligent systems, by connecting the data inside these systems, we're able to create these innovations, we're able to extract this insight. And the interesting thing here is that these systems themselves are mostly independent. They're actually operated by different organizations, different people. So people that operate the road infrastructure are different organizations that create cars, that are different organizations that do navigational services, etc. So we see the need to be able to connect these systems together. And this is something that's quite new. From a digital point of view, from a computer scientist's point of view. So how do we actually manage these systems? What's the approach that we're taking to it? Well, interesting enough, we're borrowing a metaphor that comes from the natural world. So the work that's been done on natural ecosystems that looks at the community of organizations and how they interact with the environment as a complete system. So this goes back to Tansley's work almost 100 years ago, looking at natural ecosystems and trying to model and understand them. And what we've recognized within the digital world is that we now have, our society is now creating digital ecosystems, data ecosystems, where we have a socio-technical system where we need to be able to connect the data within the system between different interacting individuals and organizations and to extract value from it. And these data ecosystems can be oriented towards business needs, but also towards other societal purposes as well, sustainability, energy, water, etc. They can also have different characteristics in terms of they can be a marketplace, they can be built around competition, but they can also be built around collaboration as well. It's not just about an economic imperative, but it can be a societal imperative that's there as well. So what this gives us is these data ecosystems where we're able to connect our different systems together. We're able to create these data value chains of where we're able to share the data between different systems, and we can create our data-driven and AI-powered smart environments. However, there's key challenges to this. Interoperability is a key challenge. The protocols and the semantics that are required to be able to connect these systems are significant challenges as well. So let's give an example of one project that was tackling this. So this is a project that I was involved in called Transforming Transport. It had 22 pilot sites across Europe at a budget of roughly about 15 million. And what we were trying to do is to look at the data ecosystems that were around different transport and logistics hubs and to bring the information together to be able to optimize the operation of the system. So very much a challenge around data integration and sharing data between different stakeholders within this. Within Transforming Transport, when we analyzed the work, what we saw is that we needed to look at the raw data that was produced, and we needed to go through various set of different stages till we got to the point where we had our insights or our knowledge that we could actually use to drive value in our environment. And one of the key things here is that in these early stages, when you're moving from your raw data to a point where you can start to extract insight from it, it requires significant amounts of investment from different from the organizations. So you don't, in these early stages, you don't actually get much return on value because you're investing in the data integration, you're investing in sharing, you're investing in bringing people together. And this is a significant challenge that we have. Within Transforming Transport, we used CCAN, so it's an open data catalog. We developed a number of different techniques to help us to be able to identify the data sources that we have and to be able to move between those data sources to look at what were the useful parts of data that we needed to integrate. So we weren't trying to integrate everything, we were looking through it. Effectively, we were out with our pan in the stream looking for our nuggets of gold, and by sieving through the data, we come back with our nuggets. And this was effectively the process that we have. And this is, I would say, state of the art in terms of what's really happening within data ecosystems today. However, the challenge is that in order for this to actually be useful to us at a societal scale, we need to industrialize what we're doing in terms of the significance of the mining that we're able to do into this data. So we need to move to more rigorous and industrial scale data mining. So where does this kind of leave us? What's the challenge that we have? Well, we know that we have lots of sources of data. We know how to be able to generate the data, how to be able to use sensors to gather data. We're very good at gathering and analyzing data. We're also very good at understanding how we can use AI and data analytics to be able to optimize decision making. So once we have the data and we recognize the insights, we know how to be able to go into a domain and to be able to optimize it. And these are areas that we're actually doing quite well in. The problem is that we're not very good at connecting these things together. We're missing something in the middle whereby we're able to generate the data and gather it, but then to be able to easily move it in a way that allows the data to be accessible and portable to different type of decision-making scenarios that we have. And this is the real challenge that we have. We're missing these data platforms that exist in the middle. We're missing this infrastructure that allows us to be able to share and to be able to maximize the benefit of the resource. So in order to be able to do this, how do we support these data ecosystems? Well, the challenge that we have is data sharing. And this kind of manifests its way in different ways where we talk about data spaces. How can we share data within data spaces, or how can we use data platforms or data marketplaces? These are different tools and different conceptualizations of how we can try to improve data sharing within smart environments. We have some examples of these. This is quite interesting. So if we look at this in the broad scale, we have two examples from the aviation industry. One is from Airbus called Skywise, and Airbus have implemented a data platform that goes all the way from their suppliers to their customers. So it covers the entire value chain of what Airbus does, and it brings together all of the organizations that they interact with, whether it's suppliers for parts in their airplanes to operators within their airport. They bring them all together into one data platform. The same way we can do it at a smaller scale. So within Lanati Airport, we actually, within the Waternomics project, we built a small scale data space that allowed all of the different organizations that work with the airport to share their information on how they use water and data management. So we have good examples of this, of where we can have data sharing platforms that we can bring together the data between different organizations and create these applications. So we have nice examples of this. However, if we want to transform our society, it becomes important for us to think bigger, to kind of force ourselves to understand what are the big opportunities that we have. We have these small scale examples, but how do we get a societal transformation? How do we put in infrastructure that could actually support and enable the society-wide transformation that we need to get towards sustainability? So I believe that as we look at open data, now we need to start moving towards the notion of public data infrastructure. So how do we, as a forward-thinking society, look at the provision of public data infrastructure, including data platforms, as a shared societal service, in the same way that we have shared societal services for water, for sanitation, for healthcare, for education? Can we have a shared societal service for our public data infrastructure?
Hi, Ed, just 1 minute there.
That's perfect, thank you. So when we look at the European scale, also this has been recognized by the European Commission, and last year they released a data strategy that looked at this challenge that we have at a European level. What the European data strategy wants to do is to improve the flow of information at a European level between sectors, between organizations, improve the availability of high quality data, ensure that data is shared respecting European rules, and that people have access to it. A key part of that European data strategy is what's known as common European data spaces. Here, the European Commission wants to organize different sectors of society around data sharing platforms that will enable and improve the sharing of data within those sectors or around a particular societal need, such as mobility or Green Deal, energy, etc. So this is the key challenge for us, and one of the topics that we can talk about today is how do we improve this data sharing. And then finally, the last point I want to make, and this is my last slide, is that this is not just a technology challenge. I think we've developed the infrastructure and we've developed the technology to do this, but in order for this to be successful, we need to have other elements as well, such as what's the appropriate governance for these data spaces? How do we involve people and organizations? What's the organizational changes that need to take place? How can people share their data in a trusted way so that they're not worried about privacy issues, or they're not worried about competitive issues as well? So it's not just a technical challenge, but it's a social technical challenge and a societal challenge as well. And with that, I'll pass back to the organizers.
Great, thank you so much, Ed. That was fantastic. Really good overview of what's happening at European level, as well as the issues that are facing us in Ireland. Thanks very much. So I'll pass on to Yvonne Buckley, Professor Yvonne Buckley from Trinity College Dublin now, and you can just share your screen. Thanks.
Okay, so can you see that in full screen?
Yep, perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, hi everybody. It's lovely to talk to you. So I'm with Nature Plus, which is the Trinity Centre for Biodiversity and Sustainable Nature-Based Solutions. So I'm going to be talking specifically about data for nature here. And I really wanted to focus my talk today on the reuse of data. And the reason for that is any of you who regularly use data or regularly collect data know how hard it is often to collect good quality nature data. So we spend, in our lab, we spend a lot of the time with our faces in the middle of a field, you know, identifying small plants and insects and recording data. And sometimes it can be beautiful, like this picture here in Inisheer, and it's a pleasure to collect data. And at other times it's much more like this, which is actually a morning in July at the Burren, where it was, I think, 6 degrees at midday. So an absolutely shocking couple of days of data collection, actually. And I think I put off some of my master's students for life. So we all know that data can be really hard to collect, and it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears often to collect it. So this is why reuse is particularly important. You don't just collect data for one use for you now with the questions that you have now, but you might want to think about future you. What might you want to do with this data in the future? Or what might other people like to do with these data? So they might want to join them up with other data sets and get more value from the data that you've collected. So reuse is a big part of what we do. I not only collect data, so we collect data in our lab, but we also use data that other people have collected. So we use data from both sides. So that's why I think we have a particular appreciation for the difficulty in collecting data and getting the maximum value you can out of it, as well as the use of other people's data and the challenges that are involved in that. And I think that the themes of the workshop here today around accuracy, availability, accessibility, usability, reproducibility, and discoverability are very, very relevant to reuse. And it's super important to think about how you and other people might reuse your data right from the start when you're designing the data collection, all the ways through to publishing the data and keeping your data curation systems going. So I'm going to, so just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from with this, I'm very much an ecologist, but I've used data science methods throughout my career. And I've been involved in 2 very large team science projects. One is the Nutrient Network, which is a global coordinated distributed experiment. So over 100 people worldwide collaborate. We all do the same experiment and we pool our data into joint, you know, to a big shared database. And then the other one is Plant PopNet, which I coordinate. And again, this is a large distributed observational network where we, about 70 sites worldwide collaborate. We all collect data. And it's been going for the last 6 or 7 years, and we put that data together into a shared database for subsequent use and analysis. So all of these have had targeted initial questions. So the data were collected for very specific reasons, but it's become very clear over the decade or so that they've been running that there are many other questions that can be asked using these data, and I'm calling that untargeted reuse. So we have targeted use, and then we have untargeted reuse. And there are different challenges in terms of data sharing for both of those. The other key thing here is that there are multiple data collectors and multiple data users, and that always needs to be kept in mind when we're thinking about our principles for data reuse. The other project that I've been heavily involved in is the compilation of the Compadre and Commadre matrix population model databases. And again, this is not data collection. This is actually compiling data that already exists in the literature from multiple sources, papers and personal records. They get compiled into a shared database that's made openly available and free to use by everyone. So the key challenges there are around data curation. So how do we digitize these data, and how do we make them available to as wide a range of people as possible for many different kinds of uses, very much looking at the untargeted reuse side of things there. So what are the key considerations with data collection? So we need very clear data collection protocols, and we need to be thinking about the use and the reuse of data when we're coming up with our data collection protocols. You should pilot these with lots of different people and be prepared for misinterpretation. So when there are multiple groups and multiple people collecting data using a common protocol, there are multiple ways that multiple people can get this wrong. And no matter how good you are and how clear you are in your protocol, you and the people around you will most likely get it wrong at some point. So you need to be prepared for that kind of misinterpretation and for the errors that can arise due to not following the protocol perfectly. There's a lot you can do here around the design of your data sheets for field collection, and the design of the data sheets that you use for digitization, if those are two separate things. Very often in the field, particularly in Ireland, we can't take computers or tablets out with us because it's just too wet. So we end up using a pencil and waterproof paper, and then that has to be digitized. So there's actually two steps to the collection. You collect it in the field, and then you have to transfer it into its digital form. By careful design of those systems, you can actually manage out a lot of the misinterpretation and inaccuracies that can arise. The contextual information when you're out in the field collecting data is absolutely critical, and one of the most important pieces of information are the GPS coordinates. And for any kind of data on nature, the GPS coordinates are really, really important. They not only enable researchers to put the data they've collected in their local context, but they enable more data to be appended to that original data set. So you can go back and you can repeat the surveys, or you can add in environmental information that wasn't available at the time. And this increases the usability of the data that you're collecting, because people can connect it to a location and get a lot more value from that. It also increases the reproducibility of the data collection, because people can go out and they can repeat the data collection that you've done to track changes, for example, or just to see if they get the same result again. We need to think very carefully about data sheet and database design for how the data will be collected and how it's going to be organized for curation, storage, and analysis. So all of these things need to be thought about before you actually get into the field. And it's all about increasing the accessibility and the usability of the data after you've come away from the field and you have that data in hand. I often think about myself as three people, not because I'm some crazy deity, but there's past me, which is what I've done in the past. There's current me, which is what I'm doing now. And then there's future me. And when I think about data reuse, I'm thinking as much about future me. So what am I going to need in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from these data, as I am thinking about me now? And very often, if I've done something sensible, I will be very happy with past me if I've actually, written my metadata correctly and thought about my data management plan and filled in my data sheets the right way. So I can be very happy with past me, and sometimes I'm swearing at past me because I haven't done the right thing. So thinking about your past and future selves, I find useful when thinking about the right way to do reusable data. So a data management plan is actually absolutely critical to what we do these days. Most of our funders now demand a data management plan is in place. And we have found it not only useful in terms of responding to our funders' requests, but we have found it incredibly helpful when communicating with the collaborators in our projects. We can refer to our data management plan. Everything is written down. When you have a large distributed collaboration and lots of people using the data, it's incredibly helpful to have the data management plan available to everyone so they can see exactly what we have and where it is, and they can make sensible data requests.
Hey, Yvonne, you've 1 minute left there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. So a data management plan can always be amended or improved. It's very important as part of this plan to have data sharing agreements and policies, and it's a real job. It needs to be recognized and rewarded. Just to give you an idea of the kind of investment that we put into data curation for Plant PopNet, which is about 75 sites and about 6 or 7 years worth of data, you can see that the data curation, the total person years that we put into data curation exceeds all the other jobs, including the data collection itself. So our data curation is really the bulk of the job here. Data curation, it's very important to use interoperable formats, reusable formats. Simplest is best, so just CSV files is what we mostly use. We put a lot of time and effort into documenting and automating the data cleaning and repair stage. So this is when we get all the data sets in, and we try and fix problems that are associated with them. We produce standard data products, and we plan for versioning. So we have a versioning plan to enable us to publish data products of different versions. So our data flow, actually, before we even get to using the data products, we have quite a complex flow of cleaning steps. We use GitHub, we use Markdown files to document and make our data cleaning procedure really reproducible. And we find that absolutely essential for what we're doing. In the future, people may want to clean these data in a different way, and we need to be able to respond to that. And then finally, we need to manage our outputs. We need to publish the papers, obviously, with the results of the research, but we need to make the data discoverable. So we need metadata, we need to archive it somewhere sensible, attach a DOI to the data sets, and we need to reward the work that people do and put into data collection and curation by citing data objects when we use them and budgeting appropriately for the data work that we're doing. And then finally, you can track and reuse the data that you've published. I'm going to skip this because I think we might come back to it later about what we need to do better in terms of our national biodiversity data. But just to finally finish up and say that only by careful management of our data can we appreciate and find these beautiful nuggets of information, like the gold nuggets in the previous talk. These are our gold nuggets. These are three four-leaf clovers that we found doing field work in the Swiss Alps. So that's it from me, and I'd just like to thank everybody who does the data management in my lab.
Super, thanks so much, Yvonne. Yeah, some reflections on the harsh realities of actually having boots on the ground in Ireland, but obviously you were able to strike gold in Switzerland. That's amazing. Okay, so we're going to hear now from Gemma Weir from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, as one of the major organisations in Ireland that's responsible for collecting nature-related data and then publishing it. So we're really excited to hear from Gemma. So if you want to share your screen, go ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, Orlaith. Thanks a million. Will do. Okay. So listen, thanks very much for inviting me today. So I'm the Ecological Data Manager in NPWS. So I'm just going to give you just kind of an overview. I think it's important just to give you an overview of what we do and the challenges we're facing and what we're doing to try and ensure that we can get our information out there to users. I suppose, first of all, I just wanted to kind of remind people of what our role is in NPWS. Our job is really to ensure or secure the conservation of a representative range of ecosystems and to maintain and enhance populations of flora and fauna in Ireland. Piece of cake. As part of that, we're involved in designation and consultation and advice on protection of habitats and species identified for nature conservation in Ireland. So that would include a suite of protected areas such as natural heritage areas or NHAs, special areas of conservation, SACs, and special protection areas. Also, we're involved in the implementation of national and EU legislation and policies for nature and conservation and biodiversity, including, say, the EU Habitats Directive, the Birds Directive, and ratification and implementation on the range of international conventions and agreements relating to natural heritage. And we're involved in managing and maintaining state-owned areas and national parks and nature reserves. So I suppose there's just there's a number of key legislative areas. So we talked about, so from EU legislation perspective, I suppose primarily the ones that we take the lead on would be the Habitats Directive and the Birds Directive, but we would also assist other government bodies and agencies in the implementation of other EU directives such as the Water Framework Directive, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, also in EIA, SEA, Inspire, and Open Data Directive. Just highlighted in this some of the key legislative and policy drivers, and I've highlighted those ones that we take a lead on. So that would be, say, from the national perspective, the Wildlife Acts, European communities, the regulations, and also then in terms of policy, we would obviously have a leading role in terms of development of our National Biodiversity Action Plan, which is currently in interim review. And I've just listed some of the other areas that we're involved in. Next slide there, Orla, please. So our data collection activities are very varied as a result of our responsibilities. So typically we'd be involved in designation, inventory, surveillance, enforcement, as well as site management, but also in terms of monitoring and reporting and communications and outreach and education. So just return again, Orla. Yeah, and so that involves collection on lots of lovely, beautiful data. And this is just an example of some of the kinds of the variety of habitats and species that we're involved in, and also some of the management that we're involved in, and unfortunately some of the negative impacts that we're trying to tackle. Next slide, please, Orla. Okay, so just a very whistle-stop tour in terms of protected areas. So I just mentioned some of those protected areas. So this just gives just some figures there. At the moment, we're looking at 439 SACs, 165 SPAs. Together, they make the Natura 2000 network. We additionally have 155 designated NHAs, as well as national parks, nature reserves, sanctuaries, refuges for fauna. This information can be accessed through our online designations viewer. Continue, Orla, please. And this is just some stats on those areas there for you. So approximately about 14% of our terrestrial areas designated. And that just gives some breakdown of areas on those SAC, SPA, and NHA designations. Next slide, please, Orla. So very much NPWS has been an open data organization. I mean, open data publishing is pretty much a default, and we've been doing so for many, many years, trying to ensure that our data is freely and publicly accessible. So we share our standards and guidelines on our website. We establish very much standards and procedures for data collection, both for internal use as well as for when we commission external individuals or companies to undertake surveys for us. We rely on them to meet our standards and guidelines such that we can actually disseminate that data at the end of the process, because it's the taxpayer that's ultimately paying for that data collection. So I think Ed and Orla have gone over the standards or the need for those already, and I will move on. So next slide there, please, Orla. So just some examples of NPWS key publications, I suppose. This is just showing we have a number of strategic publications. I think they're quite important because they kind of set the framework for our activities and our data collection activities. So on the left-hand side, we have a couple of examples with the prioritized action framework. That's a strategic multi-annual planning tool, which kind of gives an overview of what measures we believe are needed for the implementation of the Natura network. And that includes the financial needs and linking that to measures to corresponding EU funding programs. Also then the National Biodiversity Action Plan, which I've already mentioned. And then on the right-hand side, we have some of the Irish Wildlife Manual series there. So we have some examples from some monitoring reports. We also have some examples from Article 17 reports. So that is the overview report for the most recent, the 2019 Habitats Directive report, which is a 5-yearly report to the EU on the overall national conservation status of our habitats and species protected under the EU Habitats Directive. And also then we have just a project I was very much involved in, which was a 2015-2016 pilot on ecosystem service mapping and assessment, and which very much was about trying to pull information together to try and bring together information on ecosystems and their assessment and develop indicators for that. And that was a very interesting experience. As part of that, we also identified a number of key data gaps, which are, I think some of those gaps remain in terms of the availability of information for doing national natural capital accounting. If you continue there, Orla, I think there's just one more. And also we would very much be, sorry, just previous slide there, Orla, very much be involved in looking at the protected and threatened species in Ireland. So we would produce checklists on that, and they're published again as Irish wildlife manuals. Next slide there, please, Orla. Yeah, so this is just a kind of a whistle-stop overview of an example of the kinds of varied data collection and publications that we might have on a site. So this is just an example from Clara Bog. And I suppose what I just really wanted to show here is, this is an example. We've obviously we have collection of information. It's collected over time and at different scales, and it's used to assess the condition and type of protected habitats and species, and looking at monitoring indicators of their structures and functions over time. So here we have an archive. So there's the middle picture shows an archive from the boundary survey, the original boundary survey for the site. More recent, we have 3D surface analysis. We have drain mapping shown there. And we also have an example up there in the upper right of, say, from the drone video, which was used to develop and update vegetation community mapping for the site, but also some of the management responses that are there being undertaken for the site. And in the middle, we have just an example of a backing document, a very detailed, comprehensive document on the used for development of the site-specific conservation objectives for the site. So that would be talking to the legally protected aspects of the site. But obviously the whole, the site is, in this particular case, very much relying on the multiple ecosystems that work together in the site. Next slide there, please, Orla.
1 minute there, Gemma.
Thanks a million.
Thanks. Okay.
So just, I suppose, in terms of dissemination, our data is accessible through our current website, which is which I've just shown there, and we also have a mapping portal where we can access our data, and our data. All of this, we make our data also available through uptodata.gov.ie as well. Next slide there, please. So this is just if you can just hit return, Orla. This is just our, okay, sorry, if you just go back. Yeah, so this is our habitats and species public map viewers, just so people are aware of it. Next slide, please. This is just some links and examples that people can follow up after, just in terms of accessing some of those viewers, but there are many more there. That's just some examples of some project areas. Next slide, please. For data that we don't publish, and we don't publish some data for either because of its ecological sensitivity or because it's either still in progress. So that data can be accessed through data request forms, and I've just included the links there. But you can see there from the chart on the left, that has been increasing the last number of years, and there are a variety of reasons why people will be trying to access information. So the highest reason, or the most frequent reason for requests, are because they're trying to access rare and threatened or ecologically sensitive information. Next slide, please. Okay, just in terms of data discovery, continue. Yeah, so I suppose we're just making sure we publish our information through ISDE, uptodata.gov.ie, and our spatial data is also accessible through Inspire, through the GeoHive GeoPortal. Next slide, please. And we would be involved in a lot of data sharing initiatives. So you can see some of our work is accessible through GeoHive. We would also share our information directly with the NPTC, so we would ensure that our species data gets passed on to them for onward dissemination. And also we would be participate in research projects, so we would have collaborated on the environmental sensitivity mapping web tool is an example there. Up there in the upper right is an example where our data reported under the EU Birds and Habitats Directive is then disseminated through the Natura 2000 network viewer. And we would also work with, obviously, the Natural Capital Ireland, which we part fund, and also with Central Statistics Office in terms of their development now on environmental accounts. Next slide, please. I suppose just where we're at now, in the last year, we worked on a proposal ourselves for an innovation fund, and that was to look at developing a concept for a heritagedata.gov.ie portal, and that was going to be a joint portal between ourselves and our National Monument Service, who have very similar need for data publication. We both are sharing current web platforms that are quite outdated. So we were quite keen to really focus on trying to better serve users by making an open data portal that would be accessible. So next slide, please. I won't go through this in great detail, but just if you can keep going, Orla. Thanks a million. There are just some slides from that project. We did some high level analysis. We did a maturity audit, and that's just an example from the prototype. I suppose just the next steps where we are at, obviously NPWS is under an ongoing review. So where we go next in terms of data collection and data dissemination will partly be determined by that. In the meantime, we are in the process of upgrading some of our infrastructure, including some of our GIS infrastructure, and revising some of our metadata workflow. We have recently moved, and with that comes a migration from IT perspective, and also it means that just in terms of projects and developments, that can mean that that's a little bit disruptive for us to actually work on projects that might take several years. But we're currently dovetailing now in with our new department, which is very much involved in looking at open data and open data publication. Next slide, please. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, that's it. Thanks very much.
And yes, just to answer the question in the chat, that the slide decks will be circulated afterwards. Actually, it's probably better to think of this conference or this workshop today not as a one-off thing, but as a kind of ongoing project. We'll have a landing page on our website with all the slides, the links to the video presentations, and eventually this final report with recommendations. But part of the recommendations is your views and the discussions that we hope to have just now in the breakout rooms. So I'll just rapidly introduce them. One sec. So hopefully, yeah, you should be able to see that. Okay. Just to give you a sense of what we're planning here. So we're going to have 6 topics, 6 themes for the breakout rooms, and Yvonne has kindly introduced a couple of those topics already. There are lots more that we could consider, but we had to narrow it down. And given that there was so much interest in this conference and there's so many people on the call, we're splitting them into 2. So there'll be 2 versions of each group, if that makes sense, two duplicates on the same theme. Each group will have a note taker that's already assigned and a rapporteur person that will report back to the plenary. But because just due to time, we'll only hear back from one of these duplicate groups. And everybody, you don't have to worry, everybody's already been pre-assigned, so you're not going to be called on out of the blue. But just to give you kind of, these are some of the key principles of data collection, data curation, and we've heard about some of these today. Upskilling, I think, is really, we're gonna talk through some of these. Who owns the data? How is it funded? Ed highlighted that there's a kind of a funding gap, and you do need to invest in that early phase of the mining process if you're going to get the gold nuggets out of it. So, just kind of some food for thought there. Our themes for today, hold on, I'm just trying to advance that. Why is it not advancing? There you go. So we have 6 groups, as I said. There's one, I won't go through this in detail, but We have one group on data availability, or sorry, rather two groups on data accuracy, 2 groups on data usability, 2 groups on data accessibility, 2 groups on data reproducibility, and 2 groups on data discoverability. Now, I know those terms might be a bit unclear for people. What Emer has shared in the chat there is what you need to download. That has kind of a very light definition, but also the guiding questions for these discussion groups. And I think with that, we're going to break out into these groups. You've all been pre-assigned, yeah, and so everybody, if you're happy to join, just go ahead, and please do take notes. And if you have your own notes, please send them on to us at Natural Capital Ireland. Thanks. Hi everyone, welcome back. Looks like we have most of you back. We're going to share the findings from those groups. I realize they were short enough, but hopefully you were able to get into some of the queries and questions that we've been raising today. So thanks very much for doing that. I was just saying it's tough on Zoom as opposed to like breaking out in an actual room and all sitting around a table looking at faces. But thanks very much for your participation. So we have 6 rapporteurs, and there were more groups than that. But what I'd ask you to do is, if you have any notes, thoughts of any description, and even if you reflect after and you think actually I didn't get to say that, please, you can add them in the chat here or do email us. As I say, this is more of a project and we're preparing recommendations. So your insights are invaluable to us. So thanks very much. So first off, I'm going to ask Ed Curry from the Data Accessibility Group just to give, and we'll pitch it about 2 minutes each. So really just rapid fire, what were the top items that came through from your group, Ed?
Yeah, great. So fantastic group, great conversation, nice diversity of people from different backgrounds. When we talked about the complexity of using data, is it hard? Yes, it is hard, and it's a lot to do with people needing expertise in computer science, data scientists to be able to work with and to leverage the data. And there's a lot of, in terms of the data that we have, we've got a lot of data, but we're also missing a lot of data. Spatial data, air quality data, more marine data. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to do more there. Is it difficult for us to, what are the challenges and opportunities that we have? Well, the big challenge is the cost required to gather all the data and to bring it together. There's a lot of upfront cost that's needed, and we need a lot of coordination between our different stakeholders, whether it's the EPA, the Marine Institute, other stakeholders, to bring them together to be able to make the case. But this also presents the opportunity that we have, because the data that we're collecting is critical if we want to measure our progress towards our key sustainability goals. So coordinating these stakeholders is key. Building the case for the investment that's required in this data is something that this community has to do, the people in this workshop have to do. We need to make the case, because it's not just a pure economic case to collect the data, but rather this data can change policy, and we need to make the case that we collect it and we have informed policy by using this data. And then finally, in terms of the technical aspects, we talked about the need for metadata, controlled vocabularies, and having more standardization of the data collection process at source, so that it becomes more usable, more accessible, more findable.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thanks very much, Ed. Great points. I think maybe we'll go to Ainoa next for data usability.
Thank you, Orla. Yeah, great group as well. We had a good discussion, managed to go through all questions, and I suppose I'm going to address it in the order of the questions. So in terms of the need of users, we thought that that was a very difficult question to answer, other than saying that it's very varied. The users are expanding broader and broader across sectors. So there's multiple needs there, multiple users with multiple needs. So we thought that the way to address or to tackle some of the issues to tailor to the needs of users, the importance of metadata was central there. So having the information about the scale, quality, accuracy, things like that, it's very important to make informed decisions about whether and how to use the data. And it's an ongoing issue in Irish data sets, the lack of metadata or incomplete metadata. And then in terms of access to the various data browsers, there is a kind of a consensus, and that some of the web browsers there are not readily usable. So datagov.ie, for example, is just a medley of data sets, hard to discover, hard to find, different scales, different geographical scopes. There's issues around cross-border projects as well. We noticed that there was difficulties aligning data sets across borders, especially and scale-wise, and the same applies perhaps when it comes to coastal management, with terrestrial and marine data sets having different methods, scales, levels of accuracy. And the last point that was made was in relation to the timestamp of the data that affects usability. So different browsers having different data sets that are updated at different times. So there's duplicates of information with different timestamps across the web. And how do you actually trust on which one to go for? Obviously the source to start with, but when you rely on other web browsers, just to be aware of this because it affects usability. So that's pretty much it.
Excellent, thanks, Anna. I think really interesting about the different, the different web browsers. It's not something you'd immediately think of necessarily, but obviously can create issues for research and for usability. Thanks for that. So we'll go to availability, data availability with Gemma Weir, please.
Thanks. Hiya. Yeah, we had a small but effective group, I'd say. I suppose the key things we were looking at was to what extent was data available, what were the gaps, what were the different types of users, what procedures are needed to ensure the data available is more available in the future. So there were 5 of us in the group. So some of the observations people had was that they felt there was a lot more data that was out there that could be available, but it was very much on a need on who you knew and what your awareness was. And that is a particular challenge if you're working, say, for example, in an NGO and you don't have the necessary expertise, but it's often based on contacts. And obviously that's something that should be good and should be addressed. There were some examples of good projects where good directories of available data. So including some, I think Noah would have originally worked on, I think from the EPA UCD project on data available for strategic environmental assessment. And it's great, like that kind of directory being maintained and updated is critical because exactly the same kinds of issues came up. Some of the challenges when you could identify the data, when you could locate the data, were your confidence in it, was it current? So metadata and having appropriate standards and procedures for that was essential. But also that can be a challenge even with metadata, that it can be a challenge for non-expert users to use. So maybe some kind of interpretation or some kind of lay description for users. Also just some interest in some of the newer sources of data becoming available. So the likes of Strava was mentioned in terms of walking routes, and from, I suppose, from a cultural ecosystem services perspective, that's quite important. But again, we often cross with those data privacy issues. I suppose people kind of felt that there was the risk, it kind of depended on who you worked with or what sector you worked in. So you might have awareness of your own data, but very little awareness of other sources of what could be potentially useful or potentially applicable data. So again, that need for that kind of a repository, an actively maintained repository and archiving kind of function. I think that's it. I don't know if anybody else from the group has anything I missed.
Super, thanks a million, Gemma. If you do have anything additional to add, just please do add it in the chat. But yeah, really interesting about the new forms of data, Strava and Flickr, things like that can be used for cultural ecosystem services, I know as well. So if we could move on to discoverability, and Kieran, thanks very much for stepping in last minute just to be rapporteur from that group.
No worries. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sense of the few notes we took. Again, we had a nice, tight, small group of 5 or 6 of us. So I guess on discoverability, the first thing we established is that it's difficult. And I guess we spoke about a few different things and they kind of came down to 2 related strands. and I'm paraphrasing here, so if anybody wants to jump in, by all means, correct me, but it's really discoverability starts at the data gathering stage, where the format and the structure and the documentation around the data sets is established. And that then feeds into what we discussed was maybe a signposting system. So a central signposting system that would point people in the right direction. It mightn't give them the exact location of the data sets they're looking for, but one of the things we discussed was that, like, people aren't sure maybe of the data sets they need until they go looking, and ultimately discoverability is an individual job, but a central system that would point them in the right direction would get them started, which we sort of felt was the hardest part of all. Like, where do you start? Ever before you know what exactly you're looking for, you have to know which direction to face. So that was kind of it. And I guess the related stuff to that, then, to those two central ideas, was that when people are gathering data, the first stage of discoverability, when they're gathering data, as well as considering their own primary uses for the data they're gathering, they maybe just keep in the back of their mind potential secondary uses, and who else might benefit from that data, what that data might be linked to, what do they need in terms of documentation or in tagging with keywords, the data sets they're gathering. And then that will help feed into the signpost type system, where the data is publicized and it's made available for people to come and find it. The last two things then, just on that, were, like, as well as the discoverability and finding the data, what would help there as well would be some supports around not just pointing people towards a whole load of spreadsheets, but just something to help them get started on the visualization side of things, as well, to begin some initial analysis. And just the last point then was the need again to raise awareness amongst the wider public as to the availability of such data, and to help them to discover it in the first place. And maybe because there is now a general, or a bit of an increased public interest in climate and the environment and nature in general, this thing has to be sort of timely, and there would be a need, to leverage or to piggyback on that general interest at the moment, rather than trying to raise awareness at a time when there's something else in the news. So that was kind of most of what we discussed.
Super. Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Really, really interesting. And I like the idea of, rolling with what's in the news. That's really, really interesting. Okay, so just a reminder that we're going to run till 11:40. We're just going to hear back from our final two breakout groups, and then we'll wrap up for the morning session, and the afternoon session begins then at 2. So if we could hear from the data accuracy group, Conor Kretsch, please.
All right, thanks, Orla. So we had also a tight little group. There was, I think, about 7 or 8 of us. We didn't cover everything that we, of the 3 kind of questions as such that were put toward us, but because we did have quite a good discussion. And to a certain extent, the discussion on accuracy actually kind of overlapped a little bit with the issue of data availability. So, there's a number of issues that kind of, I guess, affect from both perspectives. So one of the key points that was made was the apparent lack of data, or the apparent lack of confidence in the accuracy of data that might be put forward on, for example, on the quality or the value of certain ecosystems. So, for example, one of the examples was given where various small to medium enterprises or NGOs may be looking at ways of investing in nature-based solutions, or maybe looking at perhaps doing some work to preserve ecosystem services. but the information didn't seem to be available to be certain as to which ecosystems they should prioritize, perhaps in a particular location or for a particular purpose. So towards the end of actually developing methods for nature-based solutions, I guess there's that information wasn't available. And from that, you could say, well, if the information isn't available, or if it's not available at a national level and you have to rely on data that you're looking at from overseas, you're not sure entirely how accurate that information might be or how applicable it might be to the Irish context. Another issue was raised, which was where you might have information on perhaps the suitability of certain ecosystems or certain habitat types for carbon sequestration, but you might not necessarily have the information on other co-benefits that you might get. So if you do some work to help with carbon, protecting a carbon sink, does that also have a positive knock-on benefit for public health and well-being? Does it also help with the management of water quality or water flows through an ecosystem and so on? So this type of uncertainty and lack of awareness about where the right information might be and how applicable it might be at different scales or across different levels. Another point that was made which in terms of the amount of data or the value or the volume of data that's available for other projects. So one point was made that there just isn't the level of data required, for example, in a peatland project context on the types of different peatland sites or other different habitat types that might be available, or perhaps on the quality of what those habitats might be. So it was. We agreed that there's kind of a need for a baseline, if you like, on what data is available and where that data has come from and how accessible it might be or what the extent and scope of it might be. Without that, it's hard to actually assess how accurate or suitable the data is. There needs to be a bit more of a one-stop shop for a lot of this data to be accessed from. That kind of led on to another point, which is an uncertainty as to where exactly data might need to go. So with regards to, a challenge of data entry or data management, there might be certain projects underway where the finalized data, it's not sure whether it'll end up in some kind of a silo, whether it perhaps data that has a wide benefit across multiple different sectors, not just perhaps nature conservation, but landscape management or public health or whatever. It would be a shame to see that type of data just end up in a particular silo when it could perhaps not be, maybe if it's a data portal that doesn't get the right amount of traffic, or that it ends up not being shared in the right format or in the right forum. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be some kind of a single dashboard, if you like, for a lot of this data to go to, so that people know exactly where to go to for not just one particular set of data, but other data that might be related to that particular project. So as we said, there's a lot of data available, as we heard this morning, from the National Biodiversity Data Centre, from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, from the Central Statistics Office or Marine Institute and so on, but perhaps a single dashboard to be able to point people to which of those they need to go to for the particular information that they want. It would be very valuable. And one other point which relates to that, it's actually a point of my own just to add in, and it just echoes back to, I think, Yvonne's presentation this morning. Yvonne made the point of, the importance of recording not just the data, but the protocols that were used to collect that data, to store that data, how it was recorded and how it's being managed. That information isn't necessarily always available when you are looking at data online. You can see the final output, but you're not necessarily sure how that data was collated. So you can't necessarily know how accurate it is for the project that you're working on. And perhaps including that in some kind of a dashboard or some kind of a data recording forum or platform where you can not only see the data, but dig down into the actual methods used, so that you can make sure that not only is it suitable for your project or for the use of an SME or whatever it happens to be, but that it can be reliable, or you can reproduce it again in the future. So that's my quick sum. If there's anything I've missed, I'd ask the rest of the group to throw it into the chat there.
Great, thanks a million, Connor. And finally, we'll go to Yvonne, who led the group on data reproducibility, and then we'll close the morning session.
Great, thanks. We were talking about data reproducibility, but we took kind of a whole data lifecycle point of view on this. So at one end, you've got the reproducibility of collecting data, and how likely it is that if you collected the same data again, you get the same result. But then there's lots of other steps where reproducibility is important. So for example, after you've collected the data, there's often a data cleaning step where people fix problems with the data. You know, if you've entered the wrong data in the wrong column, for example, or you've put multiple values in a cell that should only have one value, all of that needs to be sorted out and cleaned before that you get a usable data product at the end. And the reproducibility of those steps, and this relates back to Connor's final point there about reproducibility, and having the information available that tells you exactly what's happened to the data from the raw to the finished product. That information is not always available to you, and that's a big part of reproducibility. Can a user produce the same data product from the raw data that you have produced? Then we talked about the reproducibility of moving data from one format to another. So when you change format, for example, from a GPS TIFF file to a vector-based format, you know, can the data be accurately reproduced when you change that format? That was important, and particularly at the moment when people are thinking more and more about making their data more widely available and openly available, they might be thinking about switching format to something that's more openly accessible. So you need to be sure that when you do that, you don't lose quality. We talked about the importance of reproducibility for monitoring, particularly in environmental and nature data. We often undertake monitoring, and the example is from Irish Water, you know, doing water quality monitoring through time. You need to be sure that you're reproducing the same kind of data if you're going to be measuring trends in water quality through time. There was issues around transparency, and that comes back to the reproducibility and having the right kinds of metadata. And then we had a discussion about the reproducibility of data and the importance of that for combining it with other data sets. And then we finished up by having a bit of a discussion about the ability to track data use. So when data is being used and reused, you might be having a bigger impact than you think you are by making that data openly available, and the importance of being able to track data reuse through time. But that kind of went a little bit off topic in terms of reproducibility, but I thought I'd throw that in there as well. So tracking data reuse.
Yeah, thanks so much. And that's a really interesting point that hasn't been raised so far, the analytics really of what's the most used data set on data.gov.ie, and do they know that it is the most used? So that's a really interesting point, I think. Okay, brilliant. I won't keep you any longer from the morning session. Thank you so much to all our speakers. Thank you so much to the note takers and plenary presenters. We really appreciate it. It's going to help us prepare these recommendations, which we want to be a collaborative exercise. And hopefully we'll see some of you back here at 2 p.m. I know some of you can't make it, but again, we're going to be recording them. So thanks for joining the morning session, and hopefully see you later. Bye, everyone.